some fighters divide opinion. But Machado Garry has reached a level where even a UFC legend says he's the one guy he simply can't stand. And this is where the story starts getting really interesting. Machado Garry has collected plenty of rivals and critics during his rise in the UFC. Since his debut on the sport's biggest stage at UFC 268 4 years ago, the outspoken Irish welterweight has become one of the most polarizing names on the roster, attracting both die-hard supporters and people who can't wait to see him lose. His recent win over Carlos Prates in April pushed his UFC record to 9 victories in 10 octagon appearances, with his only setback coming against Shavkat Rakhmonov last December, a loss that briefly slowed his title momentum but didn't kill the hype. Now, with a crucial matchup against Belal Muhammad at UFC Qatar this Saturday, Garry has a chance to notch back-to-back wins since that defeat and loudly stake his claim for his first shot at UFC Gold. But here's where it gets controversial. One of the sport's most recognizable former champions is openly hoping that run stops right now. Rampage versus Garry. How it all went wrong. Garry's larger-than-life personality, combined with constant rumors and misinformation about his personal life, has earned him a substantial group of detractors, both among fans and fellow fighters. One of the most vocal is former UFC light heavyweight champion Rampage Jackson, who now holds what might be the most extreme stance on Garry. He says there's only one fighter he truly dislikes, and it's Machado Garry. Their bad blood traces back to what started as a simple podcast mix-up and spiraled into a public feud. The tension began around UFC 298 Fight Week in February 2024, when Garry was lined up to appear on the Jackson podcast, which Jackson co-hosts. A few days before the scheduled appearance, Jackson went on Ariel Helwani's show and claimed that Garry was reluctant to come on because he was afraid Rampage would clown him on air. That narrative painted Garry as thin-skinned and scared of being roasted, which only fueled online criticism. When Garry heard those comments, along with other remarks Jackson made that touched on false rumors about Garry's family, he fired back hard. The podcast fallout, Garry responded by publicly calling Rampage stupid for saying he was scared of the show just days before he was actually supposed to appear. From Garry's perspective, Jackson's comments essentially created drama out of thin air and misrepresented his intentions, so he pulled out of the podcast altogether. That decision turned what could have been a light-hearted interview into a full-blown grudge, and both sides dug in. Later, during a Jackson podcast episode featuring Anthony Pettis, Jackson revisited the situation and took things up another notch. He explained that, at the start of the show's run, he had been told that one unnamed fighter was nervous about coming on because they thought Rampage would make fun of them. Jackson admitted he assumed that fighter was Garry, since Garry was scheduled to appear, but later realized it was actually someone else. Even with that clarification, Jackson doubled down by saying that, at this point, there is only one fighter he truly can't stand, and that's Machado Garry. In retelling the story, Jackson also repeated Garry's furious reaction, noting that Garry blasted him for being so thick, so stupid, that he didn't realize Garry was set to come on the show. The whole scenario raises a spicy question. Was this just a simple misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion? Or did both men deliberately lean into the drama to boost their own profiles and platforms? And this is the part most people miss. In today's fight game, the line between genuine beef and promotional theater is thinner than ever. Garry's title hopes and extra drama. While that feud simmers in the background, Garry's focus inside the cage is as high stakes as ever. His upcoming fight against Belal Muhammad at UFC Qatar is huge for his welterweight ambitions. A win would not only give him consecutive victories since the Rakhmonov loss, but also strengthen his argument that he deserves a crack at the title next. For a fighter whose image is built around being the future, this is the kind of moment that can either validate the hype or arm his critics with fresh ammunition. Outside the cage, Garry has shown he's not afraid to stir the pot with other contenders either. He has repeatedly found himself at the center of online debates, partly because he leans into the role of the confident, sometimes cocky, modern star. Some see that swagger as authentic self-belief that sells fights. Others view it as arrogance that makes it easy to root against him. That split is exactly what keeps his name trending every time he fights or speaks. Mocking Jack Della Maddalena. After UFC 322, recently, Garry also turned heads with his reaction to the most recent welterweight title fight. He closely watched UFC 322, where Islam Makhachev dominated Jack Della Maddalena to claim the 170-pound crown and add a second championship to his legacy. Garry already had history with Della Maddalena due to the Australian's past comments about him at a press conference. So there was clearly no love lost going into that matchup. When Della Maddalena lost, Garry wasted no time piling on. On social media, he openly mocked the former champion's performance, labeling it as one of the weakest title defenses in UFC history. For supporters, this was classic Garry, a brash contender willing to speak his mind and keep rivalries alive. For critics, it was yet another example of him being disrespectful to a fellow fighter who had just taken a tough loss on a massive stage. The big question for fans, at this point, Ian Machado Garry is more than just another rising contender. He's a lightning rod for strong opinions. Some feel Rampage Jackson went too far by singling him out as the only fighter he personally dislikes, especially when the tension started with a misunderstanding. Others believe Garry's own words and actions, from the podcast fallout to mocking Della Maddalena, justify the backlash and prove he thrives on controversy. So what do you think? Is Garry an unfairly targeted star who gets dragged by legends and rivals for simply being outspoken? Or is he intentionally playing the villain and then acting surprised when people turn on him? Do you side more with Rampage's frustration or with Garry's right to defend himself and talk trash in a sport built on promotion and personality? Share your take. Is he the future of the division, or the fighter you, like Rampage, just can't stand?